I mean, when you get given it, you got to play it. Davis.
Davis. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Oh,
Pete. Pete.
That's not how I wanted to reveal that.
All right, ladies and gents. Well, I am coming off 2 consecutive losses, and I am feeling pretty bad about it. Pete has absolutely curb stomped me with his very smart pivot to Gallantmon, and oh boy, trust me when I say my blue-green Shivamon deck is just not, it's not cutting it anymore. Part of that is, you know, it's Shivamon's fault. Cool as Shivamon is, it's a 4 to Evo, and while its effective burn security and lockout option cards is really cool, it's just not really doing much once it gets out onto the field, and Pete almost always has the response, specifically Gallantmon and then Gallantmon X to pop it, shred my own security, and just generally speaking ruin my day. And that is compounded by the fact that while this deck really wants to be making some cool joggers plays like with Chimeramon, we just don't have the tech to do it. We are stuck on the EX1 Imperial stuff, which very much wants to build a stack. And, you know, I am building the stacks in the raising, but they're not really achieving much when they come out. Generally speaking, it's too late once I've promoted out of raising and gone into one of the few Imperialdramons that I actually have in deck. So really, we need to leave this old tech behind and finally upgrade to something that can keep pace with the X antibody stuff that Pete is playing around with. And obviously, there is a piece of sealed product that I know I've been desperately waiting to open. You've all been waiting for me to open it too. It's been chilling in my desk forever, and well, you know, we're this close to the end of the series, potentially, and with me being on my erstwhile revenge arc, I think it's time we finally crack it open, give this deck the upgrade it deserves, get it into modern fighting shape, and then we do our best to totally blow Pete out of the water. So give me a second to grab that product, and then we will finally get to the opening that we have all been waiting for. All right, ladies and gents, I don't have a ton of time, but I mean, what's there to talk about? We know what we're opening this week. We are finally getting into the Ultimate Ancient Dragon starter deck, which will give us access to Joggers plays. We'll have access to a more consistent boss monster in Imperialdramon Dragon mode, the blue and green one, and it'll give us a couple of nice removal options that do not cost 8 or 9 to cast. So all around great stuff, big boost to the deck. We can finally get rid of most of the EX1 crap that's been slowing us down, and hopefully we'll be able to apply a ton of pressure to Pete going forward. And since I did have a little bit in the budget left over to grab a pack, because I'm just going to consider this $20 market value, that leaves enough for a single booster of Next Adventure. Pete has gotten me with hybrid for game a couple times, so I'm hoping that I can pull a hybrid of my own and, you know, take him out if I'm in a bit of a tough spot. Both blue or green hybrids would work in this case because I do have access, of course, to Ken in the deck as well as Davis Ken, and obviously Davis and Davis Ken again both give me the sources. So, you know, Akumamon is great, Metal Kabuterimon is great, whatever the case is, if I can just get a blue or green hybrid out of here, I will be overjoyed. So why don't we actually start with this, because these will be a bit more of an ordeal to open up. Let's see what we've got. Oh, something thick back there, I think. All right, we've got Monitamon, Dino Memory Boost, that's interesting, Wendigomon, Monochromon, not the right kind of hybrid, King Waymon, Darugamon, Don't Care, Bukamon, Dorgreymon, Skull Knightmon, and Ancient Kazemon. Wrong color of hybrid, ladies and gents. Okay, and some X antibody stuff. God, that is disappointing. All right, well, that's the pack for the week. Let's crack into these guys now. We'll just open up one, I think for the sake of time. All right, that took a little bit of mangling off screen, but we finally got access to it over here. So let's just slide this off and we'll take a good look. I don't think you get any promos at the back, right? No, we do get some cool new memory counters though, so we'll be using those today. And the big things, of course, we have some green eggs, which we're definitely not going to use. We've got some Searcher Vmons, Madoki Betamons, cool, flexible. We got a 3-drop if you have a green in play. And yes, there we go. That's what we care about. Jogress on a level 4, blue and green, swing, unsuspend, you know, bottom deck something on Jogress as well, pretty good. And then this guy, of course, spit out 2 level 4 or lowers, 1 blue, 1 green, from the sources when you go up into him, which is great, although I have to be a little careful, obviously, with Death Xmon flying around. We got Wormmon, and to turn Jogress pretty good. This becomes a 3-drop if you have a blue in play. Security Digimon, backup Jogress play, not as great, but still something. We got more bugs if that's the route we want to take, but no, I had my fill. Grand Kuwagamon is not my friend, unfortunately. And then we have access to Mega Death, which is a much better removal spell, and if Pete is sticking on Gallantmon this week, well, that'll let me end him pretty conclusively. And then, oh, Flower Cannon is in here as well. I actually didn't know that it came in this deck, but it's more of a Pete thing than it is for me, so... Okay, so realistically, I know what I need to get out of here. I'm just gonna go and crack open the second one. We're gonna sleeve up the deck, and I have some pretty major tweaks to make ahead of going into the game right now because, oh boy, there's a lot of really crappy EX1 stuff in here that just has to go. Especially these guys. These level 5s have done nothing for me the whole time. So we'll see. I think there are plenty of obvious deletions that we can make, and then pretty soon we'll have a nice Imperial starter deck upgrade lined up. Oh, it'll be so nice. Can you tell I'm a little stressed out going into this match? The thought of losing 3 times in a row is just... It's not gonna happen to us, boys. We're gonna come away with it today. So yeah, let me crack this open, sleeve everything up, and then we're gonna go get our revenge on Pete. I cannot tell you how long I've been waiting for this. We finally have a proper Imperialdramon deck. Now, as you can probably tell, I have dumped most of the EX1 stuff in favor of the new starter deck pieces, because duh. Our first major inclusion is the starter deck Vmon, which has an on-play skill to search for a free attribute Digimon. This is really good because it doesn't care about color, which means that I can pick up a few of the mono green cards that I'm running. Speaking of which, I'm testing out the starter deck Wormmon, if only for the fact that Pete loves to memory choke me, and the idea of using an end of turn Jogress to kind of screw with his boards, well, it sounds pretty tempting. I'm also running 4 of the starter deck Stingmon because it's basically a 3-drop champion, and it gives so much advantage thanks to its inheritable. And the fact that that inheritable is not once per turn means that I can maybe draw 2, even 3 cards while going for my big swing plays, which is pretty cracked. I did decide to tech in one of the new starter deck XVmons as well, if only because it can be a 3-drop in a pinch or a 4-drop in a situation where I don't open up a rookie, and knowing my luck, that will probably come up. But of course, the pride and glory of the starter deck is this Imperialdramon. When you Jogress into it, you can tuck an opponent's Digimon with 6,000 DP or less, and it has the ability to basically swing twice per turn, which is bonkers when you factor in the likely jamming inheritable and Stingmon's draw inheritable. Honestly, if I see this early enough, I win. Simple as. My next Jogress target is Dino Beamon, which has a nice stun effect on Jogress, which can be useful for getting around the blockers or stopping a Gallantmon rampage before it gets too bad. It's fine, but to be honest, I'm almost always going to wish this was just another couple copies of Imperialdramon. And the last Digimon worth discussing here is the starter deck Imperialdramon. It's a hefty 4 to digivolve into, but it'll basically spit out XVmon and Stingmon so I can Jogress again, potentially on the same turn, which obviously makes putting game on board quite easy. I just have to be mindful of Death Xmon and Gallantmon, however, because this does put a lot of bodies on board, and regardless of what Pete is playing, he loves to feast on small bodies. And finally, I have some reliable removal in the form of Mega Death. This will suspend and then bounce something. Usually, it's the same target, but it is worth noting that this could potentially stop Pete from pulling off one of his famed bum rushes. And, you know, mostly it's going to be my out to Gallantmon if we're being frank. Knowing that I can basically punish the 1-stack approach that the deck usually takes, it gives me quite a bit of peace of mind, and unlike something like Positron Laser, the only thing I need to work around here is the fact that I will need a blue and green source in play to cast it from hand. Now, overall, I am overjoyed with what the deck is finally capable of. The deck finally has some ways to apply pretty insane pressure from turn 1, and if all goes according to plan, I can basically shred through Pete's security in a couple of turns, maybe 2 to 3 at most. The big goal really is to kill him before Gallantmon gets out, or before my field becomes clogged enough with tamers for him to bring down Death Xmon on my head. That's the general idea. Now, let's see if the deck will perform as expected, or if it was all just hype. Okay, and jumping into game 1 with the brand new, ultra hype, totally unbeatable Imperialdramon starter deck, and I brick. I have a handful of Megadeaths and not much else, which really sucks. Pete begins to swarm the board while I dig for a blue champion, and unfortunately I come up short. Eventually, I do get an XVmon down, but it's met with a Grandis Scissor, which pretty much destroys my hopes from there. I eventually resort to putting a Paildramon in the Raising, which hurts my soul, and Pete commences the usual bum rush, dropping me down to just 2 security. I come out swinging, and after going into EX1 Dragon mode, I do manage to clear most of Pete's board. But it's not quite enough, because Pete is able to establish a Grand Kuwagamon, and after Digibursting away, he easily shreds through my last security and then takes the game. Game 2 gets off to a very different start. I have my XVmon right away, and Pete establishes a Davis pretty early on. He also, in the course of revealing the top cards for Davis, reveals 2 Death Xmon. So yeah, that's a thing. I get my chip damage in and then drop Stingmon, threatening the Jogress if Pete doesn't have the answer. And Pete doesn't, instead building up in the back. So I chip in with jamming and then Jogress into Dino Beamon for another swing. I also establish my own Davis to make my next run at things a little bit easier. And as far as Pete is concerned, he doesn't quite have it, and after dropping a couple of searchers, he passes it back to me. And then I unleash Unholy Hell. I Hammer Spark up to 4, go into Dragon mode, spit out 2 bodies, then I swing in and establish an XVmon in the back, ensuring that anything but Death Xmon will ruin me, and thankfully I know they are both chillin' at the bottom of the deck right now. Pete gets out Old Hercules and clears my Dragon mode, but he runs into a Megadeath insecurity, which does kinda seal the deal for him. He drops the blocker Kabuterimon and waits to see what happens. And I of course come out, Jogress into Paildramon, bottom decking the blocker, and then I just swing in like a madman for game. And then we come to game 3, where I get my usual XVmon start, while Pete doesn't really draw much. He drops a Searcher, and seeing a Death Xmon go to the bottom, I decide I might as well go for the throat. I promote out and drop the Stingmon, putting Pete in a pretty awkward situation. He goes for a little rookie rushing, and after he's cleared all of his bodies for me, I go into the big Jogress play. I absolutely melt Pete's security, and then I drop a Searcher while having a rookie in the back to make sure that I've basically got game on board. And sadly, Pete doesn't have it. He's able to drop a body, put up a blocker in order to stave off the inevitable, but really I have more than enough swings, and after going full on aggro, I take the game. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That, well, it concludes the revenge arc, I guess. Or, I could be a total anime villain and just press the issue and continue on until I at least secure a fresh 2-game win streak of my own. But regardless, we are in really good shape now because I am just 2 victories away from taking the series. But I know that the road there is going to be long and fairly arduous. Pete did go back to the bugs this week, and I think Imperialdramon proved that it can handle those pretty, well, handily. But I also discovered that Pete has access to 2 Death Xmons now. Which, what? That is going to be a big problem going forward, especially if I'm leaning into the starter deck Imperialdramon because, well, that puts a ton of bodies on board for Death Xmon to reduce its cost. And I do have to be a little worried about Gallantmon as well because it loves to destroy small bodies and gain a ton of advantage. And honestly, Pete going back to Gallantmon is going to be, I think, the biggest hurdle to overcome if it happens, because it takes away a lot of what I was able to get away with in these games. For example, I cannot drop a Stingmon as aggressively as I did because Pete will probably just delete it and gain a ton of advantage. And even going for that big joggers play is going to be a little risky because, well, there's 2 small bodies that I put on board, which Pete can now feast on. Sure, I have access to a bit more removal now, which is nice. Megadeth will certainly put in work against both Gallantmon and Death Exmon, but it's not a silver bullet. I think what my deck is missing more than anything is just a really powerful finisher, and I had hoped that I would pull Paladin mode out of BT8, but since Creepymon reared its ugly head instead, the best I think I can just hope for is another fighter mode. Or, maybe I scoop up a couple of armors and that kind of lets me skirt Gallantmon's deletion triggers on the lower end. Or, I can just lean into a properly set up Imperialdramon because, as clearly demonstrated here, that can just shred through people's security before they ever have a chance to get set up. So I think the responsible thing to do here is go hunting for the fighter mode, and in the meantime, make the deck as consistent as possible so that I can blow Pete out before he ever gets set up. And at the very least, if I don't go swinging into security before I am totally set up, then I can take advantage of the fact that Gallantmon is not the most consistent deck in the world, and maybe I can deal lethal damage before the big Red Royal Knight ever drops on the board. Either way, we are heading into what is going to be the tensest part of this series, and if there's one thing I'm betting on for sure, it's that things are about to get very interesting.